We heard back from our friends in NYPD.
Famous.
It was your mother, son.
Does that mean he's guilty?
I told you, I knew your dad for a long time. He did that shit. Guilty as
Now, this particular breakdown is gonna open your mind up to the world of power like never before. You're never gonna see or think about the Power universe or certain characters the same ever again. So make sure you stick with this video right through to the very end to get the complete full picture. But I do want to start by asking the question, who are the biggest players in Power? Who won the game of Power? Who are the real top dogs associated with the Power universe? A couple of characters would spring to mind. You've got the usual Ghost, Tommy, Kanan. In Power Book 2 Ghost, you'd say Tariq. In Force, you'd say Tommy, Diamond, the CBI. I also think Shanti and Junard are playing a very clever chess game in the background. In Raising Kanan, you'd say Rock, the Thomases, and also Unique. But over on X a couple of days ago, I posted this about Snaps and Pop. You know what's crazy? Snaps and Pop have cemented themselves into Power Hall of Fame in the space of a season, all from the comfort of their restaurant/bar. They've been playing chess while everybody else has been playing checkers. They've got everyone on strings, and their influence in terms of the wider Power universe shouldn't go unnoticed. Power Hall of Fame. And that's the topic of this particular breakdown. Just how big is Snaps and Pop's influence when it comes to the broader world of Power? From mentoring and manipulating Kanan, introducing Breeze, a new potential alliance with Unique, but also how their influence would have also trickled down to Ghost and Tommy, and if you even want to go one step further, Tariq St. Patrick. They aren't just background players in Raising Kanan, they're the puppet masters pulling Kanan Starks to strings, and setting the stage for what we're about to see through Breeze, Tommy, and also Ghost. And a lot of what we saw in Power through various manipulative tactics would have also come from what Kanan went through with Snaps and Pop. A lot of what we're probably going to see in Season 5 and also in Power Origins, in terms of the manipulation, would have been learnt from Snaps and Pop. Right towards the end, we're also going to come around to some general thoughts and theories around their downfall, so again, stick with this right to the very end. But let's take it back a step and take a brief look at who Snaps and Pop are, and just how powerful they are in the game. Snaps and Pop are two retired drug lords, and they would have run Queen's drug trade in the 70s and also 80s. They said they were now retired, but they were still kind of involved, because the truth is, when you enter this kind of world, when are you ever truly retired? They also remain feared and respected, with connections to cops, suppliers, the Italians, and previous people that they did business with include people like Ronnie Mathis, and also as we learn in episode 410, also Defcon Stark. Straight off the bat, when we were introduced to them, we saw how they weren't to be messed with, how respected they were, how smart they were. Small things like Pop just hugging Ronnie, which wasn't a hug as such, she was actually patting him down to see if he was wearing any wires. Now they originally got acquainted to Kanan through Ronnie back in 306. They were introduced at the club, which is where Snaps and Pop took a real liking to Kanan. And that's when they first pitched the idea of him working together with Ronnie. Kind of like what we saw in 410 when they pitched the idea of him working alongside Unique. Definitely just a stream of income at first, that's the facts. People always say, don't take it personally, it's just business. And that's how Snaps originally saw Kanan when they were first introduced back in season 3. It was all about business. They were treating him as his own man, separate to Rock, but also because they know they can control someone like Kanan rather than control someone like Rock, who isn't always the easiest to deal with. You only have to look at her business dealings with Unique back in season 1, the Italians in season 2, Quan in season 4. She's always been very tough to work with, and she's always been tough when it comes to Kanan. That's why she came to pay Snaps and Pop a visit back in 308. She got word from Duke that Kanan was hanging around with Bonnie and Clyde, and she wanted Kanan to have nothing to do with them, because Rock was well aware of who these guys were. However, it also works both ways. Pop mentioned that she remembered Rock when she was jumping rope outside her parents when she was just in pigtails. History definitely runs deep here, not just with Rock. Just like we mentioned before, Snaps and Pop are very well connected and have worked with a lot of big players such as Ronnie, Defcon, but also the Italians.
And you ain't in our league, Rock.
Well, you see me sitting here. You don't see who's standing behind me.
Who you talking about? Stefano?
Now Stefano is only standing by you until we tell him to sit the fuck down.
Now, if you ever wondered how big Snaps and Pop were, how powerful they were, how connected they were, well, they should have given us all the answers we needed back in season 3. They warned Rock she wasn't anywhere near their league. She may have been backed by Stefano, but he was only standing by Rock until they tell him, sit the fuck down. And if you've got that much power where you can tell Stefano to sit the fuck down, someone who's linked to the Italian crime families, you really must have some serious pull, power, influence, control, respect, and also be feared. That should have been the moment to tell us, these guys aren't just going to be background characters. They both were and are still big players in the game. despite them being retired, they sit right at the very top.
Understand when you're talking to us, you're talking to the ancestors, the forefathers, and the forebears. All at the same fucking time. We made the game, Raquel.
Now, Season 4 is where we really started to see them taking Kanan under their wing. We've spoken about how they saw Kanan as an investment, how they were looking at him to see whether he'd be worthy of long-term business. They were evaluating him, he was on probation. But as time went on, they realized that this kid is actually really smart, he's ambitious, and that's when they thought if they can guide him, mentor him, and keep him on the right path, he could end up being a real money-making machine for them. I like to try and catch him before he makes mistakes, love to have some sort of influence on him. That's why he's always giving him unsolicited advice. And that's what we really saw in the early parts of Season 4. We saw Snaps and Pop mentoring him and guiding him, trying to separate him from Rock, and getting a feel for who Kanan wants to be. Where does he see himself? In some ways it was actually an interview without Kanan knowing it was an interview. They were also protecting their investment at the same time, and that came with killing his best friend, Famous. They had officers Pickett and Wiley take out Fame not just to protect themselves, but to also protect their investment in Kanan. If Famous was talking to law enforcement, it could have maybe led law enforcement to Kanan, taking away their investment and potentially much worse. Fast forward to episode 409, Pop also killed Crystal, and it takes us back to what Rock warned Kanan back in 402. She said that Snaps and Pop haven't got to the positions they've got to without dropping a hell of a lot of bodies. They were still willing to get their hands dirty even if they were retired. Again, going back to the point I mentioned at the beginning, are you ever retired? Now, in terms of their manipulation over the two situations, we are going to get to that in the next chapter, because that's where I think it's had a big impact in terms of the broader power world. But in terms of Snaps and Pops' influence, it didn't just stop at mentoring, guiding, and manipulating Kanan. They also dropped the hint of them attempting to create a power trio of Kanan, Unique, and also Breeze.
The only thing that slow your ascent to the top of the proverbial food chain is the company you keep.
You're only as good as the heads around you.
So they warn Kanan that the company he keeps is important. You're only good as the heads around you, which I really do agree with. I think about the people I spend a lot of my time with, my circle. Are your friends really pushing you to be better? Keeping your head screwed on, keep you pushing in the gym, work-wise, business-wise, relationship-wise, or whatever else it may be? Or are they holding you back? Sometimes you do have to make some difficult decisions, because the company you keep really is important. For Kanan, we all know Famous wasn't built for the streets, and it was said by a couple of people, he was a clown, he talked too much. OC working for him also ended up betraying him. This is why they introduced Kanan to Breeze, where they're now also attempting to create an alliance with him, Breeze, and Unique. It's all about the company Kanan keeps. If he's around Breeze, who comes from a very successful stint in East New York, and put them alongside Unique, who has the streets and soldiers and the backing of Snaps and Pop, it really can make for one formidable force, putting money in all their pockets. They can corner the market through Snaps and Pops' connect and also their transportation. Now, in doing all this, exploiting Kanan in terms of his desire for independence and respect, it also drives an even further wedge between him and Rock. In essence, they see Kanan as his own man, they're giving him his independence, or what looks like independence away from Rock. Of course, it was always pushed by Rock because of her manipulation back in seasons 1 and 2, and the way their relationship has turned out, which Snaps caught very early on. Circling back to episode 402, he said it straight away. His loyalty to his mother was very suspect at best, and that's when he knew he can strike. And striking by him teaming up with Breeze and Unique, that really is one hell of a way to do it. With that being said, let's talk about how this all now transitions and impacts the broader power world. How what we've seen Snaps and Pop do over the course of season 3 and 4 impacts the entire power universe going forward. Now, in terms of Snaps and Pops' influence in the broader power world, we are going to call it the cycle of betrayal and manipulation. That's the term we're going to run with. That's the term we're probably most likely going to use a lot when it comes to season 5, but more so power origins, and as we run through this next chapter, you'll understand why. So, cycle of betrayal and manipulation. Have a look at the way Snaps and Pop have manipulated Kanan in season 4. He's been someone who's been manipulated and lied to before by Rock, and that's why there's so much trust issues here between Kanan and his mother. That's why Kanan believes that Rock was the one who took out Fame and also now Crystal. Snaps and Pop made it look like it was Rock. They specifically told him it was Rock. They played on the fact that Kanan has a very strained relationship with his mother. They kidnapped Crystal, got the information they needed to get, and once they did, they got rid. The minute someone is no use to us, we'll cut them loose, one way or another. And that's exactly what they did with Crystal after she told them Kanan believed it was Rock. And that's how they manipulated Kanan back in 409. They also left Crystal's body to be found because they knew exactly what would happen, that he'd throw the blame in Rock's direction again. You saw Pop probe and question Kanan about what he's done with that information, but how this now impacts the wider power world is because this manipulation and betrayal is going to come full circle, which is why we're calling it the cycle of betrayal and manipulation. Eventually Kanan will become aware that he's being manipulated by Snaps and Pop. Whenever or however that happens, it will happen. When that truth is revealed, he's going to go from being the manipulated to being the manipulator. And the same way we've seen Snaps and Pop manipulate Kanan, that's exactly what he's going to do to a young Ghost and a young Tommy. Maybe even Breeze gets involved in the manipulation, or we'll see him doing the same. But what Snaps and Pop have done, it really has set off a crazy chain reaction that we're about to see unfold in Season 5 and then also in Power Origins, and also what we've seen and heard back in Power. I recently replied to a comment and mentioned a Power Mystery series I think I started around 2 or 3 years ago. In one of those breakdowns, I mentioned I wouldn't be surprised if Kanan and Breeze were the ones who took out Ghost's father to gain control over Ghost, because it was said his father was trying to pull him away from the streets. But if Ghost was said to be this kid who was a very good soldier for Kanan and Breeze, one of their best, a soldier that was making them a lot of money, the story now starts to sound awfully similar and mirrors some of what Snaps and Pop have been doing with Kanan. Snaps and Pop pulling him further away from Rock, Breeze and Kanan pulling Ghost further away from his pops. Snaps manipulating, lying and controlling him because he's a very good investment. Kanan seeing the same from Ghost, manipulating, lying and controlling him because a young Ghost and Tommy would have been very good investments. You can really see why Kanan would have taken such a young liking to Ghost and Tommy, because he would have seen exactly what Snaps and Pop originally saw in him. When Kanan meets Ghost and Tommy, he's going to think these guys are going to be very good earners. He's going to put them on a probationary period just like Snaps and Pop did. He's going to use them to fill his pockets, just like Snaps and Pop did with Kanan back in Season 4. He's going to guide them, but he's also going to be manipulating the shit out of them at the same time, just like Snaps and Pop. In regards to Ghost, I wouldn't be surprised if Kanan, Breeze, or both had a hand in killing Ghost's father, just like Snaps and Pop kill Famous, where we then see Kanan telling Ghost that it was Breeze who was the one who did it. Again, just like Snaps and Pop told him that it was Rock back in 409. So you see how everything is going to kind of mirror itself. With Tommy, we all know what his character was like back in Power. He always attached himself to people that gave him a sense of belonging, because of his strained relationship that he had with Kate. Again, that's something I think we'll see in Power Origins, but it is something I'm sure Kanan will be able to clock, just like Snaps and Pop did with his relationship with Rock back in 402, just what we mentioned before, where again, he can use it to his advantage. Snaps and Pop have also introduced one of Power's most mysterious characters in Breeze, who also happens to be their nephew. Talk about having a really big impact in the world of Power, it doesn't get any bigger than that, introducing Breeze. But again, introducing Breeze to Kanan, who will then get acquainted to Tommy and a young James St. Patrick. Again, let's not forget, who's the one who gave a young James St. Patrick the nickname of Ghost? It was Breeze.
We knew this guy Breeze when we were kids. He came up with Ghost.
So Snaps and Pop actually had an indirect hand in Ghost getting his name, because this would never have happened if Snaps and Pop had never introduced Kanan to Breeze in the first place. When you think of it as a family tree, you can now picture Snaps and Pop right at the very top, Kanan and then Breeze, and then under them you have young Ghost and Tommy, with other surrounding characters like Unique and the Thomases also being involved in that world. But with Snaps and Pop's influence and manipulation having a big impact, we can take it even one step further because it also had another indirect influence on Ghost. If Ghost was being mentored by Kanan and Breeze, who were mentored by Snaps and Pop, maybe even Unique in Season 5, where did Ghost learn to do what he did to Kanan? Look at who Tariq then became later on in Power and Power Book 2 Ghost. He was also a lying manipulator as well. Let's take it even one step further considering we're talking about the cycle of betrayal and manipulation. When we talk about Snaps and Pop's influence on Kanan, how they manipulated him against Rock, you now look at what he did to Tariq and how he was manipulating him against Ghost back in Power. How he then later went on to teach him, mentor him, and guide him. The way Snaps and Pop introduced Breeze to Kanan, the way Kanan introduced him to Jukebox, Ray Ray, and the rest. But who does it all go back to when you're talking about this Power family tree? Snaps and Pop. And that's the impact that Snaps and Pop would have had when it came to the broader Power world, direct and also indirect. Manipulating Kanan and also introducing him to Breeze sets off a chain reaction to a lot of events that we saw in Power, but also a lot of events that we're still yet to see unfold in Season 5 and also in Power Origins. As I mentioned before, if we were to now do a rewatch of Power, we're now going to be able to picture the entire tree, which leads all the way back to characters like Snaps, Pop, and also Rock and the Thomases and also Unique, but more so Snaps and Pop because of their influence in Season 4. So, you talk about shaping the Power universe's biggest players, Kanan, Ghost, Tommy. You can kind of argue it did start with Rock back in Season 1, But the two players with the biggest influence since, especially introducing their nephew Breeze, is Snaps and Pop. They're the top dogs who set the theme of power, betrayal, and ambition. Now, in terms of just some general predictions of where they take Snaps and Pop's story with Kanan going forward, you would have to think they are going to have to go for what they've done, manipulating Kanan, pulling him further away from Rock, being the ones to put out the hit on Fame, and also killing Crystal. You have to assume at some point Kanan will eventually find out. There's no way he doesn't. In terms of actually how he finds out, I mean, they could run with 100 different ways, so it really is kind of pointless to kind of guess in that aspect. We'd be here all day talking about different scenarios or how that could actually happen. But the question I do think we can go into a lot more detail and talk about is, what will Kanan do when he finds out? Because this situation is also now complicated by the fact this is Breeze's uncle and aunt. There's no way he'd let Kanan get rid of his aunt Pop or Snaps. Or again, is there kind of some manipulation that goes on? A battle for power? I do think there's still going to be a major clearing of the chessboard in Season 5 to transition us into a new era of Power Origins. But how does it happen and who pulls the trigger? What will Lou do? Rock and the Thomases? What do they do when they find out? Let's have a read of what Sasha Penn had to say on the situation. I don't know that everybody trusts them. I think people just don't suspect them. When you're younger, you think you know everything, and you think the old heads have been put out to pasture. What the fuck do they know? They're harmless. That's how everybody sees Snaps and Pop, like those guys that just sit over there at their restaurant and bar and just hang out. Rock has suspicions, but I don't think those suspicions have yet risen to the point of thinking these guys are actually pulling the strings. Over time, I think it's possible that people will start to see Snaps and Pop quite different. People underestimate them. So you do get the feelings reading between the lines at some point Rock and everybody else will start to figure out Snaps and Pop are the ones who are actually pulling the strings. You have to think at some point all of them will also want revenge. And personally, I would really love to see a scenario where we do see the Thomas family coming together to then bring down Snaps and Pop. We've never really seen the Thomases as a unit working together on a common goal or a enemy, and I guess bringing down two of the baddest players would be quite a good way to see it. Whether that happens, who knows? And how Kanan navigates this downfall of Snaps and Pop is going to have to be very meticulously planned because of his relationship and partnership with Breeze. So that definitely is something to keep in mind. However, in the grand scheme of things, bringing down Snaps and Pop now, it really doesn't make a difference because the damage is done. Their job is done when it comes to raising Kanan and also the broader world of power. Kanan will have already learned to exploit trust and ambition, just like Snaps and Pop did with him. Ghost's calculated nature and his ability to betray and double-cross people also stems from Kanan's teaching, which traces back to Snaps and Pop. They've initiated a chain of betrayals that define the entire Power universe. Snaps and Pop to Kanan to Ghost to Breeze to Tariq. The whole chain is now beginning to make sense. By introducing Breeze and grooming Kanan, they've now shaped the next phase of Queen's drug trade, which will include Ghost and Tommy a bit later on, and then we know how their legacy panned out in Power. So, as I mentioned, it really doesn't matter what happens to them from here on out. They've definitely done their job. The damage has been caused. Their legacy has very much been cemented into Power's Hall of Fame. With that being said, that's a breakdown of two of the biggest players the Power universe have ever produced. Why and how their characters have such an impact when you think about the wider Power world. Circling back right to the very beginning, in my opinion, it cements them into Power Hall of Fame for their impact and influence. However, having said that, they do also need to get what's coming to them. But that's where I'm going to leave you guys to give me your thoughts, so the floor is now yours. Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section on the influence of Snaps and Pop, and how do you also see the story ending for them in Raising Kanan and also Power Origins. But, as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.